Because I don't cherry pick. Because if we're going to give the argument, I want to give the whole argument. I was playing devil's advocate. I don't think that necessarily if you eat a low-carb diet, it's going to cause you to live a shorter life. I don't believe that.
Okay.
But I think it's important to put all the data out there.
What's up, guys? Ryan here, and I'm here to answer my friend Layne Norton. So Layne did a response video, and one of the things I want to first and foremost point out is that the intention of the first video wasn't to call anyone out. It was truly to expand on things that I feel needed expanded upon from the first video. If you look at like when he did the video with Joe Rogan, I get it. It's a 3-hour episode. There's a lot that you can't talk about in that video, but there are some topics that I just feel needed more clarification, and I was getting a lot of questions about, so I really wanted to expand upon it. But the sad part about it is in Layne's response video, he starts with ad hominem attacks personally against me in the laboratory that we used to run, and then also red herring. So I want to first touch on that. So this concept of logical fallacy, if you guys don't know what that means, it's basically an error in reasoning. So this is prevalent throughout the entire video, right? You look at it, and so I make the case, like Layne goes, hey, you need to look at the study where low carbohydrate diets increase mortality, right? And so I go, hey, there's a lot of research in animal models showing that a ketogenic diet not only extends lifespan and longevity. And so his response to that is, we need to look into where Ryan got his PhD, right? So like that's a red herring. And so to kind of give you a little background of a red herring, like they're smelly fish, and they used to be like people used to put them to get hounds off the trail. Like if hounds were going one way, they would put the smelly fish to try and get them to go off the trail. So, right, like I make the argument utilizing science, and we bring a red herring into the equation and go, hey, we need to look into the realism of Ryan's PhD, right? Is it real? Having people call the school, I mean, it's just, to me, it's just sad. One, because that's someone's wasted time, but two, it's a complete red herring and a logical fallacy. So the point of this video is to stick with the actual science. And one of the things to keep in mind is in this video that Layne presented, he brings up one study, which is a good point. He brings up one study and some others, but he doesn't really get into them that we'll touch upon. But that one study out of 60, if you look at the original video that I put up, there were 60 studies in that. He touches on one. So let's really dive into that and look at, from a historical perspective, of the first research study, again, that was done by Young et al., that he critiqued. And then let's talk about the 5 other studies that he missed that I don't know where those kind of went to, but we missed them. So first and foremost, the Young study. I'm really glad he brought this study up. My apologies. I apologize for not completely breaking it down the first time.
I actually ran the statistics in an ANOVA, which determines p-value, because all the data was right there in the paper, so thank you to the authors for including that. The p-value for this paper was approximately p equal to 0.25, 5 times greater than what is required to call something significant. All this data, not significant, was not different, were not enough subjects.
Cons of the study. Sure, it's a small sample size, 6 people in the study. If you look at fat loss, 7 if you're looking at total weight loss. Measures were limited, right? It was done in 1971, but I don't discredit studies that are old just because they're old, right? They're legitimate research studies. The pros, if you look at some of the things we'll dive into, is we actually ran the stats on this, and Layne's numbers were a little off. So let's look at that. So when analyzing the data, if you use a one-way ANOVA, there were no significant differences between groups for kilograms of weight loss, right? And we actually got a p-value of 0.5. Layne reported a p-value of 0.25, so I completely agree, no significant differences. However, in regards to kilograms of fat loss, significantly greater fat loss was detected in the 30-gram group when compared to the 60-gram and 104-gram group, running that same ANOVA. So instead of running the ANOVA on weight loss, you run the ANOVA on fat loss, significant differences. And then you look at the confidence intervals here, and you'll see the significant difference when you're looking at fat mass. So that's one point, is that, yeah, if you want to analyze that study, you want to really look into it, there is actually significant differences if you run the statistics on the data. But again, that was one of 6 studies that was presented in this argument, one of 60 that was presented in the entire video. So let's touch on the other 5, because I think those kind of got overlooked in this argument here. So let's talk about the first one. And if you want to, go back and look at the original video because we talk all about these. First study, the effects of a high-protein ketogenic diet on hunger, appetite, and weight loss in obese feeding men ad libitum. The instructions to the individuals were to eat the same amount of protein, same amount of calories. One was just low carb, one was moderate carbohydrate. At the end of the study, they did an analysis. They looked at the dietary intake. The moderate carb group actually ate 12 more grams of protein. Moderate carb group ate 12 more grams of protein. However, the low carb group ate about 290 less calories. This was self-selected. So again, keep in mind, you need to take into real-world application into the equation. Like they were told to eat the same amount. People that were on a low-carb diet selected out a lower amount. So out of that 290 calories, you can say 48 of those calories are coming from protein because the moderate carb group ate more protein. Weight loss during the 4-week period was significantly greater in the low carb than the moderate carb diet. It was a difference of about 2 kilograms or 4.4 pounds. 4.4 pounds in 4 weeks. And you can attribute that to the 290 less calories. You also saw that hunger was lower. So again, this is real world application rather than controlled like, hey, you need to eat exactly this all the time. That's important to keep in mind and keep in context throughout that. So that's another study. The second study, the 3-month effects of a ketogenic diet on body composition, blood parameters, and performance metrics in CrossFit training athletes. Protein in the ketogenic dieting group went down by 26 grams. Calories went down as well. They didn't tell them to eat less, they self-selected out a lower amount of calories. Again, real world application. They told them, hey, just switch to these percentage of macronutrients and their calories went down by themselves. DEXA fat mass decreased by 12.4% in the ketogenic dieting group. No differences in performance. We failed to touch on that study. So let's kind of we're building more and more evidence. Let's talk about this study. A low carbohydrate ketogenic diet combined with 6 weeks of cross training improves body composition and performance. Really great study here. And basically what they did was they compared a control group to a low carbohydrate ketogenic group. No significant differences in lean body mass, no significant differences in performance time. They were CrossFit athletes. Carbohydrate intake was significantly lower. Fat intake was significantly higher in a low-carb ketogenic diet. However, there was no statistical difference between calories or protein. Calories and protein matched, no differences between the groups in those parameters. Yet, the ketogenic dieting group saw a greater decrease in fat mass, no differences in performance. Pretty good evidence coming out there in 2017 from Rachel Gregory. Another study that was failed to be touched upon. Efficacy of a ketogenic diet on body composition during resistance training in trained men, a randomized controlled trial. Both groups were given 20% of their calories as protein. It was hyperenergetic conditions and they were training very hard. This was a very good study that was put together. And according to their results, we conclude that subjects who underwent resistance training plus a ketogenic diet experienced a greater reduction in fat mass and visceral adipose tissue when compared to the non-ketogenic dieting group. Interesting, there's another study that matched protein and calories. The effects of a ketogenic diet on body composition, strength, power, and hormonal profiles in resistance-trained men. Study done out of our laboratory. 25 college-age men, divided them into a Western diet, ketogenic diet, and basically adapted them for 2 weeks and then trained them for 8 and looked at the difference between week 0 and week 10. And then we did a carbohydrate reintroduction phase and we clearly outlined why we did that and some of the rationale behind that in the paper if you want to read the full publication. But you look at body composition, strength, power, and blood lipid profiles. We looked at everything throughout the study. Lean body mass increased to the same extent in both the ketogenic diet and Western groups at week 10. You look at fat mass from week 0 to week 10, the ketogenic dieting group lost more. The funny part about this is Layne called out, oh, how did they gain so much lean mass from week 10 to 11? We clearly outlined in this paper, and I'll actually put a link in the bio to an article that I also wrote up explaining these results when we rapidly reintroduced carbohydrates after week 10. We looked from week 0 to week 10, we analyzed the differences. Then at week 10, we said, what happens when you rapidly reintroduce carbohydrates to the ketogenic dieting group and get them back to the amount of carbohydrates they were consuming prior to the study? And yes, we saw an increase in lean mass, but we also saw an increase in fat mass. That's clearly laid out, and we explain that clearly throughout the entire study. So I don't know how that gets overlooked oftentimes, but again, at the end, if you just look at the 10-week time period, no differences in lean body mass, significantly greater decrease in fat mass in the ketogenic dieting group. So, I mean, those were all the studies that I presented in the original video. You look at 2 new studies that were just published in 2018. These are interesting. Someone sent them to me after this video. A low carbohydrate ketogenic diet reduces body weight without compromising performance in powerlifting and Olympic athletes. This was just published in 2018. No differences in total energy intake, no differences in total protein intake. Body mass was significantly lower at the end of the 3-month low-carb ketogenic dieting phase compared with the end of the 3-month regular dieting phase. No differences in strength. It's an interesting study for people that they basically are saying for people that are looking to lower their weight class, maybe in powerlifting, this might be an approach you utilize to lower your weight class and still maintain performance. Interesting study. And then there was another one, keto adaptation enhances exercise performance and body composition responses to training and endurance athletes. They took 20 male endurance trained athletes. Again, saw the low-carb ketogenic diet experience a significantly greater decrease in body mass and percentage body fat. They actually saw a slight difference in protein intake, but again, their recommendation was the same. It was self-selected, right? So the other point to keep in mind is, yes, there are studies where you match protein, you match calories. We showed that data. We show that data in this video. But also keep in context, the real world application is I'm not going to control for every single thing that someone eats. And if you give 2 people, hey, eat this approach, eat ad libitum, which means like at will of what you want, and someone selects out a lower amount of calories, which has been shown over and over and over again in the literature, is that a bad thing? That's the real world application of what this is meant to do. So just wanted to touch on that study itself because that was the big point that Layne made in his video. There are several points in the original video that he doesn't touch on. He doesn't touch on the storing carbohydrates as fat. He touches a little bit on the fructose study that we talked about. I have nothing against fruit. I don't know why he thinks I have something against fruit. In fact, I love avocados, so those are my favorite fruit, but I have nothing against fruit. The challenge is when people are consuming like high fructose corn syrup at levels which I don't think are unrealistic if people are consuming multiple things of soda or orange juice or all these fruit juices per day. That's actually likely happening in today's society. Didn't touch on the mitochondrial dysfunction when he says just overeating and under movement. Didn't touch on the adherence. Didn't touch on the satiety. Didn't touch on flexible dieting. Didn't touch on high glycemic versus low glycemic. Didn't touch on cholesterol. Didn't touch on calories in, calories out, some of his own research that I talked about. Didn't touch on carbohydrate tolerance. Didn't touch on the longevity study. Didn't touch on the leptin and ghrelin. Didn't touch on the anaerobic performance. So several things that he didn't touch on throughout from the original video. But again, he wanted to really pick out this one study, out of 60. But I just wanted to bring that up and help bring clarity to that conversation and that one aspect that he brought out. Because I just think it's important to kind of clear the air on that. So one of the things that Layne brought up that I just wanted to touch on very quickly, because I don't think it got relayed, and this is my fault, I don't think it got relayed appropriately of my thoughts on meta-analyses in the beginning.
Meta-analysis of 32 controlled studies examining protein and calorie-equated diets, demonstrating that in most of them, weight and fat loss is not different, but if anything, fat restriction resulted in more fat loss than carb restriction.
So I was like, you know what? I need to go back and look at it. Like that's a very interesting meta-analysis. Let me go in and look at that. Well, I look at this study, and it's called the Obesity, Energetics, Body Weight Regulation, and the Effects of Diet Composition. So he linked to this study. So thank you for doing that, because I was able to get access to it. And so the challenge with meta-analyses, like we publish a lot of meta-analyses, there needs to be certain selection criteria. Otherwise, you're just cherry picking whatever you want to put inside of a meta-analysis. Like there needs to be criteria of like, hey, these are the criteria that fit it, and statistical analyses of how you're going to analyze that. Couldn't find it. Couldn't find it. Searched up and down the paper, had our team search up and could not find the selection criteria. So I said, you know what? All right, maybe they just picked whatever studies they could find. Maybe the selection criteria was just isocaloric substitution of carbohydrate for fat. Maybe that was just the pure selection criteria. Well, let's look at some of these studies, because if you're gonna use a meta-analysis as the argument of being like, hey, it actually even favors a little bit of low fat versus low carb, I like to understand the context of those studies. So I just randomly went through and saw what ones we could get access to. Here's one of them. Regulation of Macronutrient Balance in Healthy Young and Older Men by Davey et al. 2001. They used 6 young and 5 middle-aged and older men, and they did 24-hour room calorimetry. The low-carb group was 25% carbohydrate. Very different from what we're talking about in talking about a ketogenic diet and a ketogenic state. And they're looking at 24 hours, utilizing 6 young and 5 middle-aged to older men. Okay, interesting. Second, another study, composition of weight loss during short-term weight reduction, metabolic responses of obese subjects to starvation, and low-calorie ketogenic and non-ketogenic diet. 6 obese subjects for 10 days, they gave them an 800-calorie diet. And this is interesting because they used 6 subjects. Everyone had a problem with the young study that used 6 subjects. So I'm just a little confused of like, hey, we use 6 studies in a meta-analysis, that's okay, but the young study is not okay because it uses 6 or 7 subjects. But nonetheless, it used 6 obese subjects, and for 10 days, they put them on an 800-calorie diet. They looked at energy nitrogen balance. That was the way they looked at differences. Nitrogen balance was the way they looked at differences. And they actually found that people lost more weight rapidly on a low-carb ketogenic diet approach. That wasn't reflected in the meta-analysis. I have no idea why. But they actually saw that their conclusions, and the authors report this, individuals lost more weight rapidly on a low-carb ketogenic diet approach. So that's just another study that was in the meta-analysis. Another study, comparison of carbohydrate-containing and carbohydrate-restricted hypocaloric diets and treatment of obesity. 8 untrained obese females. 8 untrained obese females. 830-calorie diets for 6 weeks, matched for protein. The way they looked at differences in fat is they looked at glycerol content. Come on, man. Like, that's one of the studies that's going into the meta-analysis. You can kind of see where this is going. This one blew my mind. Fat and carbohydrate overfeeding in humans, different effects on energy storage. They basically took people who were already on a crappy diet and overfed them 50% above their energy requirements with either fat or carbohydrate. I completely agree with the takeaways from this study. If you're already eating McDonald's fast food and a crappy diet, I don't suggest you put butter in your coffee in the morning just because and overfeed on that. I completely agree. That's absolute nonsense. I actually did a video on our YouTube talking about how people like will stick butter in their coffee and yet they eat a crappy diet that's not going to be beneficial. So that was used as one of the main arguments in this meta-analysis. Another study, metabolic adaptation to a high-fat, high-carbohydrate diet. They looked at 12 children. The low carb was 30% carbohydrate. 30% carbohydrate. And all they looked at was RQ and carbohydrate utilization. Nothing groundbreaking there. You eat more carbohydrates, your RQ and carbohydrate utilization are going to go up. If you eat more fat, RQ and fat utilization, or RQ is going to go down and carbohydrate utilization is going to go down. No surprises there. That was used in the meta-analysis. Effect of a 3-day high-fat feeding period on carbohydrate balance. 3 days. 3 days. Isoenergetic, high-carbohydrate diet. Then they gave them 3 days of a high-fat diet. So they put them on a carb-heavy diet and then just kept calories the same, switched it over to fat, and saw that the high-carbohydrate balance was related to increased energy intake. 3 days of high-fat feeding following a high-carbohydrate. That's what was used in this meta-analysis. One of the most interesting studies that was in this meta-analysis was something, it was called the Carbohydrate Intake and Glycemic Index Affects Substrate Oxidation During a Controlled Weight Cycle in Healthy Men. 32 individuals. They followed 1 week of controlled overfeeding. So they overfed people for 1 week. Then they had 3 weeks of calorie restriction. And then they did 2 weeks of refeeding. It was kind of mimicking like someone like going into a show or like prepping like short term for some weight loss. And they basically had low versus high glycemic index and moderate versus high carbohydrate. They're comparing 50 versus 65% carbohydrate. Very different from what I would consider low or even moderate carbohydrate intake. 50% of their calories coming from carbohydrate. Nonetheless, subjects with 65% carbohydrate gained more body weight compared with the 50% carbohydrate diet, particularly with high glycemic index meals. Refeeding on a high glycemic index diet led to impaired basal fat oxidation when compared to a lower glycemic index diet. Postprandial metabolic flexibility was unaffected by refeeding at 50%, but clearly impaired by 65%, despite calories being the same. So the author's conclusions from this study, both higher GI and higher carbohydrate intake affect substrate oxidation and thus the regain of body weight in men. These results argue in favor of lower glycemic load diet for weight maintenance after weight loss. So again, those are just 7 studies that were in this meta-analysis that we just quickly looked up and had access to, but you're seeing studies with 6 subjects, 8 subjects, and not that I'm discounting those, but they're looking at 3 days of overfeeding. They're looking at 50% carbohydrate diets. I think the argument is very difficult to be made when you're comparing 50% versus what we're talking about with like a ketogenic diet. It's just very different. And that's why if you revert back to the original video, when I talk about meta-analyses, there needs to be specific selection criteria. Otherwise, when you have garbage in, you get garbage out, right? It's like making a recipe. You can have 12 ingredients. If the eggs are bad and you put them in that cake, the cake's gonna taste awful, right? Because you're putting something that's awful inside of that, you're mixing it up, and even though you're baking it, it's coming out and it's awful. It's like a meta-analysis. So I just wanted to touch on that because I know that was a big argument of his of saying like, hey, listen, this is something that you need to look out for. 32 controlled 32 studies in this meta-analysis, but you just need to be careful, guys. Take things in context. Look deeper into the meta-analyses and don't put all this weight and be like, oh, meta-analyses are the be-all, end-all. It depends. You need to look at the details of each and every study and understand the context. One of the other things I just want to touch on really quickly is he brings up the Kevin Hall study.
He also cited a study of a metabolic ward study done by Kevin Hall. And he made a big deal about the fact that the ketogenic diet increases energy expenditure. Well, in the Kevin Hall study, they showed a small increase in energy expenditure with it, which if you read the conclusion, the authors say that the increase they detected was near the detection limits of extremely sophisticated equipment. What they didn't see was differences in fat loss. They didn't see differences in fat loss. Actually, they observed that when the subjects switched to the ketogenic diet, there was actually a slowing of fat loss.
He claims that I emphasize energy expenditure. I don't think I ever mentioned that the Kevin Hall study favored energy expenditure for the ketogenic diet. I must have missed that. But I never said that. I'm going to replay and so you guys can see this. I talked about it in the last video, a lot of the limitations of that study, a lot. And so I broke that down and went into several limitations of that study, not going against the authors, but they actually even noted themselves some of these limitations of doing this research study. In the way it was designed, I think it was just a flawed design from the get-go, and something that I bet if they were to go back and do it, they would change. Right? So I'll replay that for you guys so you can see that. Several problems with this study, or limitations. I wouldn't say problem, limitations. One, they were fed a protein deficient diet, 16% of their calories. No one that's looking to optimize body composition would likely recommend this. And you can see this. In fact, you look at urinary nitrogen, excretion showed that the increase in protein utilization in the ketogenic diet group, because they point this out, like, oh, they were burning through protein. That urinary nitrogen excretion persisted until day 11. They were protein deficient at 16%, and that's pretty evident. So that's limitation number 1. Limitation number 2, and this is a big one. their calorie estimations were off. Even utilizing the greatest tech, right, this metabolic ward, it's supposed to be like high-end, they're very expensive things to put together. So what they did was the calories needed for subjects was determined by over in this 24-hour chamber. And they were adjusted upwards after 15 days to compensate and held stable for the last 2 weeks, even though, even with that adjustment, the subjects were still in a calorie deficit. So even utilizing the highest end technology to calculate these people's basal metabolic rate or how much they should be consuming, they were still off because these people were losing weight, continuously losing weight. So they were in a calorie deficit. All 8 weeks after, one of the other things is to keep in mind, in 8 weeks, they kept losing weight throughout this entire study protocol. And they point out at the end, it was a 300 to 400 calorie deficit throughout the entire study. So these people are in a calorie deficit the entire time, even though the point of the study was to try and get them, they're supposed to be at maintenance for each one, but they couldn't figure that out, even utilizing their metabolic ward chambers. That's one of the things to keep in mind about this Kevin Hall study that gets brought up all the time. I have no idea why, but in essence, there's a lot of things to look at in context of that entire study. Last but not least, one of the things I want to talk about is keep in mind, Layne brought up, and we showed a little bit of this at the beginning, but like Layne brought up this context. He goes, listen, I don't cherry pick data. If I'm going to give the whole argument, I want to give the entire argument. When Joe Rogan called him out on bringing up this study called Dietary Study, Dietary Carbohydrate Intake and Mortality, a prospective cohort study and meta-analysis.
If you look at longevity data, the actual longevity data, people who restrict fat versus carb live longer. Like that's what a new study that came out showed.
Are you talking about that epidemiology study that was like a questionnaire of people, what they ate over a long period of time? Highly criticized study.
Absolutely, absolutely. Here, and there's a lot of co-founders, which is why I'm not a big fan of epidemiology. But it's hard to say. It's hard to say that the study shows that if you eat carbs versus fat, that you live longer. I didn't say one was cause and effect.
But you sort of cited it as a piece of evidence.
Because I don't cherry pick.
I went, like, the flaws of this study, anyone that knows any type of science can pick apart this study, anyone. And he brings this up in the interview, so, and I don't bash him for doing that. I'm just saying if you're gonna bring up the entire context, like, make sure you just don't bring it out and show people what you want them to see, like, bring up the whole argument. But when we bring up the whole argument of like, hey, check out this young study that's showing pretty positive things, and then here's 5 other studies that are along with that, we hone in on one study. It's just, if you're gonna bring the entire argument, bring the entire argument. But if you're gonna cherry pick, then don't say you're gonna bring the entire argument. That's just one of the things I just wanted to emphasize and keep that in mind is, moving forward is, bring up the entire argument. If you're gonna bring something up, it's important to understand the entire context. And so with all of the above being addressed, all of the above, I wanted to wrap this video up with a gift. A gift that many people and Layne himself has been asking for. And I grew up and I was always told, hey, listen, if you ever want to call someone out or ask them a question, like, you go directly to them, right? You go directly to that person, you have a conversation, you just talk it through. But in this case, Layne keeps attacking and targeting someone that can't even see what he's posting because Layne blocked him on social media. So it's not even visible by him. So I called in a favor, because I know a lot of people have been asking for this. I called in a favor for my good friend and asked a good friend of mine if he'd be willing to jump on and answer your questions. Because I know there's a lot of concern. I know it's been weighing on a lot of people. They're concerned about this study that was done nearly 8 years ago. But for you guys, I'm gonna bring on my very good friend and colleague to talk about this crazy study that was done looking at HMB. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jacob Wilson.
Hello everyone, it's great to be here today. Thanks Dr. Ryan Lowery for having me on. Ryan's a really good friend. One of the, say, red herrings or ad hominem attacks that Layne has in this video is essentially calling out the HMB study, which quite frankly has nothing to do with the original argument. However, what I am going to do is address it today. The first thing Layne says is that he put out a publication in Journal of Strength Conditioning Research basically calling out our HMB research, And I saw it, and we responded to the editor and said, we have already addressed all these concerns in our previous publication, which was a response to a critique in the European Journal of Applied Physiology. So we had already, actually no, we had already addressed all of these questions. So what we did was, we told the authors to please refer to the original arguments that we made because they addressed all the questions. But what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go ahead and verbally respond to each of these arguments today. And what I'm going to essentially do is address what Layne says. Layne says, I think that the HMB study is bullshit. This is what he says. That's the first argument he makes. The second argument he makes is that our study was better than steroids. In other words, the results of HMB or a combination of HMB and ATP are better than steroids. What I'm going to demonstrate today is this. Number one, that our study with HMB was actually a replication of a previous study. So in other words, we didn't find anything new. We actually replicated a previous study, a very powerful study that actually found better results than we did. Second, what I'm going to demonstrate is that even before our studies were done, numerous other studies found similar results that we have found. And what I'm going to do is, in order to compare studies, you essentially need to standardize those studies. So sometimes studies are 10 weeks long, sometimes studies are 12 weeks long, sometimes studies are 6 weeks long. So we'll standardize it as in gains of lean mass per week. So for example, our HMB study found 0.61 kilograms of lean mass gain per week, okay? And so we'll standardize that and compare that to all other studies. And you'll see that several other studies have found what we found. Then I'm going to show brand new data from our lab, and I'm going to show original scans that demonstrate the same thing that we found in our study. And I'll actually take you through all 13 subject scans. And then finally, what I'm actually going to do is this. I'm going to address Layne's steroid argument. He essentially pulls up a study from Basin in 1996 as a study which is supposed to demonstrate the powerful impact of steroids. What I'm going to show is that that study is not how normal people in the real world utilize these types of ergogenic aids, and I'm going to show how suboptimal the training protocol is, and that the subjects were older, a lot older than the people in our subject. So you can't compare it. It's comparing apples to oranges. So with that, let's get into it. As I stated, our study is actually a replication of another study. So what I'm going to do is compare our Wilson 2014 HMB study, which didn't have any significant differences between our HMB and ATP. So it's perfectly fine to use as analysis, and that's where the major arguments come. So Wilson et al. 2014, and I'm going to compare that to a study that was done before this. And this was by Kramer et al. 2009. We're going to actually list out a table here, and we're going to compare every single variable in the study. And you're going to see that you see the same results in the same study design. So let's look at the age in Kramer's study. Kramer, 17 healthy males, aged 22.9 years of age. Our people, 11 healthy males, aged 21.6 years of age. Okay? No differences. Length of study, 12 weeks in the Kramer study, 12 weeks in our study. Type of periodization, we had a daily undulated periodized program where essentially we did alternate heavy, moderate, and light loads, and we trained every body part 3 times a week. Kramer, same exact thing. In fact, we modified our training protocol from Kramer's originally daily undulating program. Diet, they were 20% protein, 45 to 55% carbs, 30% fat. We were 22% protein, 45% carbohydrate, and 33% fat, right? Diet controlled, no differences in diet. Supplementation, our main ingredient was HMB. Their main ingredient was HMB. They had calcium HMB, we had HMB-free acid, okay? We had slightly more trained people, so we included an overreaching protocol, which essentially intensified the study. Kramer did not include that, but we used that to equate for slight training status. Training experience, okay? Kramer had recreationally trained people. The squat, 1.2 times their body weight. Bench press, 1 times body weight. Ours, squat 1.7 times body weight. Bench press was nearly identical, 1.3 times body weight. So not that much difference in training status. Muscle damage, both of us looked at creatine kinase, which is a measure of muscle damage throughout the study. basically muscle damage was high throughout each of the studies. The outcome, Kramer got actually way higher gains than we did, 0.77 kilograms of lean body mass gain per week. We saw 0.61 kilograms of lean body mass per week. Okay, so basically you see the same outcome, same study design. But let's go to this. Basically, I've already demonstrated now that the study that we did was a replication of Kramer's. So to claim that our study is, like Layne says, bullshit, would be to also lend yourself to saying that Kramer's study was also bullshit. However, let's review Kramer. William J. Kramer, Dr. Kramer, has literally established himself in many's eyes as being the #1 strength and conditioning scientist in the history of our field. Probably done more strength and conditioning studies than anyone in the history of our field. Former past president of NSCA and co-founder of NSCA, and won every single award a sports scientist could have received in our field. But let's take a look and see what he's actually done in his field by comparing them to two people who have done research in the field. Since this is really Layne and I talking to each other, let's go ahead and actually show, for example, look at ResearchGate, go to researchgate.com, look up Dr. Jacob Wilson, and look up Dr. Layne Norton, okay? Let's look at our research publications. As you can see in the graph, Layne, 19 research publications on ResearchGate, me nearly 160. 2013 Young Investigator of the Year Award. Won numerous other research awards, and have several of my papers have been published hundreds of times. So here's a comparison of someone who's done a lot of research, someone who's done research who's primarily a coach. Let's look at William Kramer's. Look at this comparison. William Kramer, over 1,000 publications on ResearchGate, right? Clearly, this is an individual who has contributed a massive amount to the literature and had done a tremendous amount of research study. So if he does a study, that's something that you can trust. We only replicated it. But you know what? Let's take both of our studies, let's set them aside for a second, and let's actually analyze other data, okay, in the literature. And again, what we're going to look at is gains in lean mass per week in their studies. And I'm going to take you through a series of individuals, and you're going to see what they actually found. Let's start with Jalko et al. In 2001. He and his group observed 0.8 kilograms per week lean mass in participants consuming HMB and creatine. Burke et al. In 2001 actually observed 0.67 kilograms of lean body mass per week in subjects consuming an amino acid and protein-based supplement. Moreover, with only para-workout nutrition, Willoughby in 2007 found 5.6 kilograms per week in 10 weeks' time. Okay, that's only with adding whey protein. Basically found very similar gains to what we found in HMB. Additionally, it's important to note that diet alone, just diet alone, independent of training, can have a robust effect on gains in lean mass. For example, Forbes and Pasquette actually found that 0.1 and 0.6 kilograms in lean body mass increases just by overfeeding alone. Just by overfeeding alone, anywhere from 0.6 to 0.81. That's just by diet, not even training. So therefore, what we can do is we can assume that there's a rate of 0.6 to 0.76 kilograms of lean body mass per week could occur just by exercise and training alone. But that is just the beginning. People talk about training status, right? Like, well, with high training status, you can't gain a lot of lean mass. Well, Stone, Dr. Stone, is one of the greatest scientists of all time in any field. And he actually conducted research in 1999, and these scientists actually introduced a periodized program, a nutritional supplement, and they had individuals who were NCAA athletes, football athletes, who weighed 76 kilograms. That's 10 more kilograms than our subjects weighed, and they're far more trained than our subjects, right? He took these individuals and put them on a periodized training program. He got 1.06 kilograms per week lean body mass gains. That's 5.3 kilograms in 5 weeks, which far exceeds the rate of lean mass in both our study and Kramer's study. And these are athletes more trained than pretty much anyone else in the literature. So now, so if we were to actually sum this up, because basically one of the things you can look at is, well, does rate of lean mass change from low weeks, say 3 to 12? Does it change from low training status to high training status? Not really. If you look at all the studies I presented, you see homogeneous across the board. So research has shown comparable rates of lean body mass gain from training has occurred across a variety of periods from 3 weeks at 0.8 kilograms per week, 5 to 6 weeks at 0.7 to 1.06 kilograms per week, and upwards of 9 to 12 weeks of 0.6 to 0.76 kilograms per week, all within the realm of the data that we found. Training status also doesn't appear to blunt the capacity to significantly increase lean body mass. For example, if you look at untrained to recreationally trained people, in the studies I presented, you see 0.6 to 0.76 kilograms of lean body mass gained. And if you look at elite athletes, you see 0.61 to 1.06 kilograms per week gained. Nutrition, even without training, also has an impact from 0.61 to 0.8 kilograms per week. So again, I've shown over and over again that you have this homogeneous response, or not homogeneous, but you have essentially several studies which have found what we found. What we found is not unique. It's the power of social media and creating these things that blows things out of proportion, when in reality, we've just found what other scientists have already found. But guess what? One of the advantages that we have at Applied Science and Performance Institute is that we do have a 21,000 square foot elite facility. We have the best research equipment in the world and some of the top training staff in the world, and we work with some of the top athletes in the world. What I'm going to show you is new data. This is from essentially a 2017 study that we did, or essentially we had NCAA athletes and they were prepping for the NFL Combine, okay? So their starting lean mass was 78 kilograms. So these athletes, you don't find in the literature. You have to realize that essentially most scientists study convenient populations, right? We had the MVP for the World Series training at ASPI, right? Yesterday we had the fastest man in the world training at ASPI. We've had the top 10 wide receivers this year in the NFL training at ASPI. Like we have an advantage. We deal with these high level populations. Because again, remember, people say training status, if you're too trained, you can't make gains. Okay, we had a group of 13 NCAA athletes, 78 kilograms in lean body mass. What I'm going to show you is their overall gains in lean body mass, right? You'll see a graph and you're going to see a line with our results on lean body mass per week with our H&B study. And each individual dot that you see are individual subjects who prep for the combine over our actual time that they train with us. Okay? And what they did was they trained for 6 weeks. So what you're going to see is, here's the data. Notice that the majority of those individuals gained more or as much lean mass as our H&B study when you look at this graph. Now Layne might go, oh, well, it's easy. Those guys, their data's bullshit. Okay. Let's just look at the original scans of each of these individuals and look at their rate of lean body mass per week. Okay? So the first subject that we're going to pull up here, athlete 1, 0.51 kilograms lean body mass per week. All right? This next individual, 0.9 kilograms lean body mass gain per week. This person started off at 96 kilograms of lean mass. Way higher than anyone in the literature. But he still gained 0.9 kilograms per week. Next individual, this individual was 93 kilograms starting, gained 0.66 kilograms per week. Next, athlete, 0.78 kilograms per week. Here's the original scan. Next original scan, this individual actually gained 0.78 kilograms per week. Again, original scan. If you want to come to our facility and look at our DEXA, happy to show you. Next individual, 0.48 kilograms per week lean body mass gain. Next individual, 0.63 kilograms lean body mass gain per week. Next, 0.8 kilograms lean body mass per week. 0.56 kilograms gain per week. The next subject, 0.55 kilograms gain per week. The next subject, 0.88 kilograms gain per week. Original scanned. This person was 66 kilograms starting, ended at 71.08. Next subject, athlete 12, 0.85 kilograms lean body mass gain per week. And the final one, athlete 13, 0.46 5-6 kilograms lean body mass gain per week. So the overall gain in lean mass from these athletes who had way greater training status and more muscle than anyone in the literature literally gained 0.7 kilograms of lean body mass per week in our laboratory, and that's live original scans. So I've definitively showed numerous studies. I've shown our studies a replication of another study, and then I showed you individual scans completely defeating the argument that trained people can't make gains. The last thing I'm going to address is Layne says HMB is as good as steroids, okay? So Layne claims this based on a study by Basin in 1996. This is one of the few studies that's actually given supraphysiological doses of anabolic steroids. What I'm going to demonstrate is that this study does not replicate real-world steroid use, and it did not use optimal training, and it did not use optimal nutrition. And the subject population was likely not optimal as well. So let's summarize what these guys found. They found that subjects gained 0.61 kilograms of lean body mass per week over a 10-week period. They gave individuals essentially 600 milligrams per week, so it's about 3 times more than replacement doses of testosterone and enanthate. So it's a long-lasting, essentially, ester of testosterone. The administration schedule, what I'm going to say, does not follow real-world scenarios, as testosterone and enanthate has a half-life of about 7 days. So users will typically oftentimes administer testosterone 2 times per week, and they'll stack it with other drugs, which I'll detail shortly using research that's actually looked into this. Okay, but using the knowledge of the half-life of testosterone and enanthate, I'm going to actually show you basically a table of what because they measure testosterone before and at the end of the study. But if you look at the half-life in testosterone, and you look at this table and the remainder of testosterone that would be in your blood via the next injection time point, what you'll actually see is that likely peak values of testosterone wouldn't occur in the blood until 5 weeks into the study anyway. So that's why no one in the real world who's taking steroids are going to take a slow-acting testosterone and not stack it with something else that's going to start giving them immediate benefits. It's not real world, and I'll show you that in other research. So these people didn't even reach peak values until 5 weeks into the study. So that's the first flaw. Okay? Let's also look at this. Let's think of the actual training protocol that they did. These individuals did bench press and squat only. Bench press and squat only. And they did 4 sets of 6 reps. They never changed the rep scheme at all. They varied between 80%, 70%, and 90% of their 1RM. Which, by the way, there's no way that's correct, that you are able to lift 4x6 at 90% at that training status. So they really probably should recheck the 1RM. But again, no variation in rep scheme. No variation in rep scheme. And if you look, periodizing rep scheme and actually including a combination of high reps and low reps results in greater muscle mass gains than one single repetition range. So we're talking about a non-periodized study that never changed the reps up. That is not ideal for hypertrophy, okay? Unlike the studies I mentioned before, which is Kramer, Stone, Wilson, all of us adjusted loads, adjusted repetitions to maximize hypertrophy. Next, while Basin did control for diet, his protein intake was probably suboptimal. He had 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight on protein intake. Willoughby actually did a study in 2011. He gave 2.3 grams per kilogram of body weight, and he resulted in almost identical gains in lean mass over the 10 weeks as Basin actually did. Think about that for a second. Literally, Willoughby found the exact same results in 10 weeks giving whey protein as Basin did over 10 weeks giving steroids. Okay? Furthermore, Pasquette found that overfeeding subjects with a diet containing 3.3 grams of protein per kilogram body weight gained 5.3 kilograms in 9 weeks. From Layne's logic, we can conclude that whey protein is as good as steroids and overfeeding is as good as steroids. Or we can take a more pragmatic approach and assume that individuals in the Willoughby study had a greater training stimulus by one of the top strength training guys actually who are out there, and had greater protein intake and used subjects that were young, whereas the people in the basin study were at the lower end of middle age. You can't compare the two. Can't compare training stimulus, suboptimal intake of steroids that's used in the real world, suboptimal protein intake, horrible training stimulus. Now, I've also already mentioned that basin's testosterone administration does not match real-world athletes. Think about this. A study by Hoffman polled people who utilize steroids that are athletes. Typical users administer 3.1 agents, not one, 3.1, and they give an average dose of 5 to 29 times physiological doses. 5 to 29 times with 3 agents. Basin subjects took 1 agent dose at 3 times replacement doses. You cannot compare our study to people who use steroids in the real world. Okay? In addition, people in the real world also ingest things like creatine and higher protein intakes along with their steroids. Okay? So again, the main point, and also it's funny because several studies have shown no lean body mass gains when administering anabolic steroids. So therefore, you could say under certain conditions, anything's more beneficial than steroids. My biggest point is you can't use one single study under one isolated condition that's suboptimal and then say that's the standard for gaining mass. What I'm going to do now, lastly, is show 2 case reports. These were individuals who were reportedly using anabolic compounds that are more realistic. The first case report I'm going to show you is a national level physique athlete, and this individual used 4 agents for a total of 1,630 to 850 milligrams per week. The athlete used high volume training. In fact, it was 30 to 40 sets per week, and moderate intensity training 2 to 3 times a week. This individual, who was using more realistic version of anabolics, actually gained 12.1 kilograms of lean body mass in 5 weeks. 12.1 kilograms in 5 weeks, okay? That's 2.3 kilograms per week, and lost body fat. Here is the original scan so you could see it. So they went from 69 kilograms to 81 kilograms, and then they backed off their usage, and they went down to 77 kilograms. And they lost body fat. Again, they went from 69 to 81 kilograms of lean mass in 5 weeks. That's a real world result that you could see, but you can't test that in the literature. You can only look at a case report for that. The next case report which we're going to be publishing is a national level powerlifter administering 3 agents for a total dosage of 910 milligrams. This individual gained 3.8 kilograms of lean body mass in 14 days. That's almost 4 kilograms in 14 days, or 1.9 kilograms per week. And then here again, you see their original results. Okay, the gains that they made. So conclusions, our study in H&B replicated training protocols that are similar to Kramer and similar in several other studies. The H&B versus steroids discussion is out of the window of comparison because you had a subpar study that you're comparing it to. So I think that's the main points that I want to get across. And again, I appreciate Dr. Lowery for bringing me on. Good times.
Hey guys, so I want to close out this video. I really appreciate Dr. Wilson coming on, addressing that, because I know there's been a lot of questions about it and a lot of people were worried about it, but I think he hopefully clarified that for all of you. But I want to close out this video by saying there's truly no hard feelings here, right? No hate, no animosity on our end. You live and you learn, right? And more than anything, I feel the empathy and desire to try and go out and help more people than ever before. That's truly what our mission is. You see, make positivity louder. Like, that's truly what we're trying to achieve, is how do we help as many people as humanly possible. And with that being said, do I think every person on the planet needs to be on a ketogenic diet? If they're not on a ketogenic diet, they suck, they're terrible. No, absolutely not. I don't feel that way. Do I feel that every person on the planet needs to be a decent human being? Absolutely. So I wanted to address this last video. This isn't going to be a back and forth like battle of like doing this stuff. I just wanted to address that mainly because I think there are people that are following this that get wrapped up in the minutia and the nonsense and then like try and attack. And so what I don't condone is stuff like this. And I'm going to pull it up because I think the challenge with this stuff is, like, I'll pull up this comment, right? This comment was from YouTube. And someone pointed this out and they got offended by it. And I'm like, there's nothing I can do to control it, unfortunately, because it's not on my platform. But someone comments, I'm just going to read it verbatim. Put Ryan's face on Pornhub and titled the video as rape. Motherfucker, you have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. Basing a whole lot of shit on a garbage study done in 1971. Not to mention n equals 8, LOL. Right? Like these comments, like it doesn't affect me. Like zero, like none of this stuff affects me. But at the same token, like that could offend someone. I don't think that's appropriate for anyone to say. And the challenge is, cool, you can't control it, but in essence, it stems from the top, right? It stems from the top and filters itself down. It stems from the people they look up to. They're looking up to Layne and saying, hey, if he's condoning this type of behavior, maybe I can do it as well. So they're seeing tweets or comments. What do you expect? What do you expect these people to comment if they're seeing it being done from someone that they look up to as a leader, as an authority, as a figure in the space, and they're condoning it? That's the type of response that you're going to get from people. I know deep down, I promise you, deep down, I know Layne's a good guy. He's a great guy. He's helping a lot of people. He's a great dad, I'm sure. But let that part of you shine, right? Let that part of you come out more. I promise you'll help impact and influence more people by doing that than any of the hate or negativity or things like that. So I plead and I urge you, Layne, use your influence for good. You have a ton of influence, which is great. You just can impact so many people. I know a lot of your audience are younger kids growing up, and you talk all the time. You inspire them, you motivate them, like, hey, go get your PhD, go do your things. Like, I think there's a better way to do it. So I urge you, use your influence for good. And that's all with this video. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Love each and every one of you. And as always, guys, make positivity louder. Love y'all.